Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. As you know, we've been kind of zeroing in more and more on specific subjects. Way back along the way, I did a lot more general sweeping things to kind of give you overviews and put things in perspective. But as time has gone on, bit by bit, I've been zeroing in more specifically in certain areas and enhancing your knowledge a bit more. Now, if you are new to the broadcast, I'm still hoping you can get a lot out of this, but at the same time, as you have time, I would go back and view some of the almost 200 broadcasts that are archived on YouTube and get a good historical perspective as well as modern perspective of what's been going on in the field of health, medicine, diet, food, growing, etc. In other words, the material that I've been presenting has to do with all those areas, and from a historical perspective as well as coming up to date now as a consequence of what happened historically. So today we're going to be talking about something that's been bugging me for a good bit, and we've thrown in pieces of it here and there, but I wanted to focus just a bit more. And so as a title, I would call this overdiagnosed, overtreated, sick, and broke. It's interesting, of course, that I'm bringing this up in light of all the national news that have been going on with the big shift in the so-called healthcare system, which I refer to as the sick care system, because in essence it really is sick care. It is not healthcare. Healthcare would be providing a lot of preventive things that would keep one from getting sick. However, the downside of that is that there's never as many dollars change hands when you are producing health instead of sickness. That sounds pretty drastic, but true. If you have studied the whole subject that I have over the last 200 years, not that I've been studying it 200 years, but over the last several years I've been studying the last 200 years of medicine and health and sickness and diet and food and soil and so forth. And the image has become quite clear how we've gotten to where we are. And the question is how do we get out of it? And I'm convinced, of course, the first step is education. And before you can adequately deal with a problem, you have to recognize what the problem is. And unfortunately, 2 broadcasts ago, I mentioned about mind programming. You know, we're a nation that has really been programmed into illness and sickness. It's almost as though if you're not taking 5 to 25 drugs, and you're not frequently seeing one or more specialists in the medical field, and if you're not dealing with some kind of major surgery or joint replacements or back surgeries or on oxygen or having to monitor your blood sugar or something, then something's wrong with you. In other words, it's almost as though we've been programmed to believe that sick is normal and health is abnormal. Now that sounds crazy, but then on the other hand, there's an old saying that in an insane world, a sane person seems crazy. And so I would say that that's kind of where we've gotten to. If you're not sick, something's wrong with you. And, you know, we talked about, before, actually at one point way back along the way, I talked about the Hippocratic Oath, which over the years, and I'm not sure if they still do it anymore, but there was a time when the Hippocratic Oath was given by every new physician before they went out into the world as a doctor. But the one big phrase that really stands out, and I'll be doing that, going more into detail. In fact, I was going to section by section analyze the Hippocratic Oath versus what's going on today. But there's one comment up there, and I think we've probably heard that more than a lot of the other statements. In fact, some of them we'd rather not look at because they kind of, what do I want to say? They're violated tremendously in today's world in medicine. At any rate, he ends up by saying, if you remember hearing it, and above all, do no harm. Okay, so we're going to start this out a bit by a book that was published very recently, and it's most of the stuff I'm going to give you actually has come from regular medicine. In other words, these are doctors who have worked in regular medicine and or researchers and or in some way have been involved with either the pharmaceutical or the journalistic side of medicine for years. These opinions about what has happened are learned opinions. In other words, it's not a guy off the street saying, I don't like drugs, or I don't like medicine, I don't like this or that. These are people who have looked at numbers and looked at consequences and looked at costs and so forth. And so they're not people, as I say, who are not familiar with the inside story of medicine. And the same is true with this book that I'm going to introduce this with, and it's called How We Do Harm. And I don't know if you can see it, but it is a very good book, and it's very recent. And the subtitle is A Doctor Breaks Ranks About Being Sick in America. Now, I believe you will find it an extremely good read. The material that he presents is coming from someone, as I say, who is from the inside. He knows what's going on. And what he is doing is he is laying on the table some of the real problems with modern medicine. Now, his name is Dr. Otis Brawley, B-R-A-W-L-E-Y, and he is the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer of the American Cancer Society and an oncologist, which is a specialist in cancer, with a dazzling clinical research and policy career. How We Do Harm pulls back the curtain on how medicine is really practiced in America. Brawley tells of doctors who select treatment based on payment they will receive rather than on demonstrated scientific results. Now, what does that mean? It means that they look at the treatment options that they could use, and instead of basing the treatment for the patient on which would be the best and most beneficial for the patient, they base it on how much money a particular treatment is going to bring in over another treatment. Now, I'm not saying this. This is Dr. Brawley making this comment. And he knows these doctors personally. So in some cases, they know that it's probably not really going to help, but it's going to be a whole lot more profitable to use that particular treatment. And he says, rather than on demonstrated scientific results, hospitals and pharmaceutical companies that seek out patients to treat even if they are not actually ill. Now, I don't know if you remember before I mentioned that there was an interview of one of the major CEOs from a major world pharmaceutical, and he said, and I have the quote, I don't have it handy here precisely, but I can paraphrase it. He said basically what we want to do is we want to actually develop a market of treating people who are not sick. We want to become like Wrigley. We want to be in every household, and we want everybody to be on our drugs, whether sick or well. And so what they did is they set out to develop a marketing scheme or plan, I would call it a scheme, to cause everyone to think that they need to be treated for something. And they do it very simply by taking every little symptom that someone might have and, in essence, convincing them that it is a sign or could be a sign of some illness, and they want to sell you a drug to manage that sign or symptom. And many times the consequences of taking the drug are worse than what would happen even if the person did have what they said they had, based on that symptom or symptoms. And of course this this says that as long as the insurance will pay, that was the subtitle of this last comment out of the flyleaf on this book, a public primed to swallow the latest pill, no matter the cost, and rising healthcare costs for unnecessary and often unproven treatments that we all pay for. Brawley calls for rational healthcare drawn from results-based, scientifically justifiable treatments, and not just the peddling of hot new drugs. Now this is the flyleaf describing Dr. Brawley, and it's interesting, and there's a lot in here, and I'm not going to, of course, read the book to you, but here's what he says at the actually beginning of the book, and I think this kind of tells the story. I don't want to be a reader for you today, but this information is much better in the writer's own words than mine. This book is a guided tour of the back room of American medicine. When I was fresh out of the University of Chicago Medical School and newly admitted behind the curtains of these back rooms, I could dismiss medical horror stories as isolated episodes of the malfunctioning of the system, another person overlooked, another judgment error, another example of bum luck, another case of the frustratingly slow march of progress. More than a quarter century later, I have seen enough to conclude that no incident of failure in American medicine should be dismissed as an aberration. Failure is the system, and those of us who are not yet victims are at high risk of being sucked into its turbines. My friend and colleague Peter Bach is fond of saying, America does not have a health care system. We have a sick care system, which I've said over and over. Peter, a health system researcher and pulmonologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, goes on to say that it's a stretch to use the word system to describe our health care, because the word denotes organization. Too often, being the patient isn't the point. Economic incentives can decide that the patient be ground up as expensively as possible with the goal of minimizing the cut of every practitioner who gets involved. When we aren't at our best, the public pays more in fees, insurance premiums, taxes, and poor outcomes. Now that's what he says right off in the book, and to me that's pretty powerful. Here's a secret. Wealth in America is no protection from getting lousy care. Wealth can increase your risk of getting lousy care. When wealthy patients demand irrational care, it's not hard to find a doctor willing to provide it. If you have more money, doctors will sell you more of what they have to sell, and they just might kill you in the process. And then he makes this comment. Again, I'm not saying this. I'm not criticizing the doctors. I believe there's some very good doctors out and do the best they can with the poor tools they have to work with. In the light of the fact we're supposedly a very advanced, enlightened, high-tech society, some of the tools are pretty primitive. I know doctors who are just plain bad. Now this again is coming from Dr. Brawley. Why do they continue to practice without impediment? The answer is simple, because no one is looking over their shoulders, no one files a disciplinary complaint, no tribunal appears, punishes them unless they do something spectacularly awful. No one is better suited to police the profession than the profession itself, but our professional societies tend to choose misguided collegiality over the well-being of the patients and the people who trust us with their lives. So these are just some comments by him. Now he goes on to tell a lot of information, and what his whole concept or theory is, he wants it to be cleaned up and do what it should be doing. Do no harm. And that's why he named the book How We Do Harm. Now that's kind of a good introduction and gives you an idea of what I'm talking about, but there are plenty of books out there. That's a good one. The next one I'm going to just mention is called Overdiagnosed, Making People Sick in the Pursuit of Health. This is by Dr. H. Gilbert Welch and a couple other doctors. And this brilliantly researched, well-argued, and clearly written book will help us avoid the unnecessary tests, drugs, surgeries, and anxiety that are the inevitable outcome of our epidemic of overdiagnosis. Now, that was written by Sidney Wolfe, another MD who wrote Worst Pills, Best Pills. As I say, these critiques are coming from within the profession themselves. It's not because I'm in the natural health field. I'm in the natural health field because I looked at both sides and I could see the direction, and I did study the history, and I know how we got here. And for me personally, the farther I can stay away from the traditional medical field, the better I like it. Now, many years ago, another doctor, an MD, by the name of Robert Mendelsohn, started trying to get people to wake up. I remember years back in the 90s and even in the 80s, he was an MD out of Illinois. He had been on the medical examining board. He taught medicine. He had practiced it for years, and he really got his eyes opened as to what was going on with medicine. And so he wrote a book called The Confessions of a Medical Heretic, which means that he deviated from what medicine was teaching and doing and tried to introduce other people to what he was talking about. And he gives some pretty powerful examples in his book. He went on to write How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. He made the comment, the worst place you can go for your health is go to the hospital. He wrote a book called Medical Male, M-A-L-E, Practice, How Women Were Exploited by the Medical Profession. And, of course, as you can well imagine, he wasn't real popular with the other doctors. He had friendly discussions on TV many times with other doctors who were furious at the fact that he was willing to hang the dirty laundry out on the line so people could be better educated. But, you know, that passed by and fell back into the... He died, and personally I have suspicion as to why he died. He had gotten to the point that he was, a lot of the people in the natural health field were being harassed and tried to put out of business. So he ended up that he started testifying on behalf of some of the natural medicine procedures and practice and people, and suddenly a friend of mine out of Georgia was supposed to have a court hearing, and I had suggested he use Dr. Mendelsohn as an expert witness. And 2 weeks before the trial, Dr. Mendelsohn suddenly and mysteriously died and ended his career as a spokesman for opening up people's eyes to what's going on with medicine. Unfortunately, things were kind of quiet for a while, and it took a few years before things have started opening up again. But again, the things that we're talking about are coming from within the ranks, not much outside the ranks. Now, of course, people in the natural health field if they have any real understanding at all, have chosen to get into it because they are aware of the dangers and the abuses and the outlandish expenses that have developed over the years. But these people, in many cases, come directly out of the traditional or standard medicine field themselves. Okay, now this overdiagnosis, I say, is written by some medical doctors, and he goes on to say how this concept of being overdiagnosed, how it is abused. And it's terrible to me how people sit back and don't look into what's going on and allow this monster to continue to grow into a giant dragon without saying, oh, wait a minute, that is enough. And that's my purpose. I mean, it's your choice. I have no qualms if your choice is that you want the latest technology and surgery or drugs or whatever medicine has to offer. That's your choice. That's the nice thing about being in America. And I won't criticize anybody. And I always tell people when they come to see me, these are your choices, and you have to make the decision. I'm not going to tell you don't do that. You were told to do it by some doctor, and I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I think what you need to do is to look into the implications of doing that. And if you feel that's the way you should go, it's your freedom to do that. And I'm not going to criticize you. If you want to take a drug that has a high risk of permanent disability or death, that's your choice, and you should be allowed to do that. And I believe you should. I made choices. Fortunately, my choices have kept me from having to have my pieces all cut out, and it's kept me from having to have massive runs of diagnostics done and so forth because of my choices. And I am an educator as much as anything else. The patients that come to see me, I spend much more time than most doctors do giving them information and telling them where to look. I produce these broadcasts for the purpose of educating people, and I'm saying you don't have to believe what I say. I think you need to go out and investigate it. What I'm doing is provoking you to go look and see if that's what the real facts are. And if you are not convinced that it's true, then fine. That's the whole idea of freedom, that you can do that. So these guys are talking about the overdiagnosis of people, and we don't have time to get into heavy detail about it, but just one of the chapters is called We Change the Rules. Now, I've said many times, and in a way I say it humorously, but I really mean it, modern doctors are taught to treat numbers and pictures, not people. So if they can't get something on a blood test that shows a tremendous deviation and they can say, aha, there it is, now we can know what to do. Or if they can't see a lump on a picture, then what can they do? Well, we can palliate your attitude. If you're depressed about it or anxious about it, we can give you an anxiety drug or an antidepressive, but we have to wait. And so they do. They wait until a bump appears somewhere down the road, but the bump probably would not have appeared had they taken preventive measures. They would have stopped that. And so many times these doctors say in these books, overdiagnosed, that things that are uncovered many times because of the abuses of diagnostic imaging and so forth, never ever do create a problem for the person, but if it's picked up on a test, they start many times heroic treatment, meaning excessive treatment, to the point that the person now is sick and impaired from the treatment, not what would have happened had they never known they had some issue. And we're going to do a broadcast in more detail on that. And an interesting term came up, and I like it. It's called incidentalomas. And that's what I'm going to call the broadcast. And so we'll get into what happens with this type of thing. And I've known of people that ended up actually permanently impaired because of the overdiagnosis. Now, some of these doctors, one of the other ones I'm going to mention, had written a book about cancer. Should I seek a diagnosis of cancer? I mean, should I be out looking? And in many cases, people have developed cancers and didn't know it, and they died with it, not because of it. And had they chosen to find out about it and went through all the therapy, they would have sealed their fate. That the chances are, if you are diagnosed with cancer and you go through traditional treatment, contrary to all the things they say, and I can back it up from, again, out of medicine, contrary to all the things they say, the chances are you won't survive 5 years once you've gone through chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. It would be a real rarity. There are some people that say the actual percentage that survive 5 years after chemotherapy in particular is about 1%. Now that's less than spontaneous remission. So that tells you something, that the person had overcome a lot to be able to survive in spite of it. So at any rate, this overdiagnosed talks about how they changed the rules. You know, it used to be, for example, the pharmaceuticals came out with their powerful statin drugs and trying to get everybody in the country on them, but a lot of people didn't qualify because the numbers that they put out is that they didn't give the drug unless you had at least so many units of cholesterol in your system, and they wrote a lot of prescriptions. I saw some numbers one time that said they were writing something around 16 million prescriptions for statins at the original number they set. But then, out of the blue, arbitrarily, the pharmaceuticals came back and said, well, you know, we've thought about it and we think that the cholesterol number should be lower. And so they told the doctors that anybody over a real low number should be on statins. So what happens is they started from 16 million prescriptions a year to 36 million prescriptions a year. In other words, they pretty well doubled plus their prescriptions for the drug. Now what did that mean? Guess what? A few more $1 billion in income because of just changing a number. In fact, in this book, Overdiagnosed, we changed the rules. How numbers get changed to give you diabetes, high cholesterol, and osteoporosis. Now, as I say, we won't go into detail, but that just gives you a little bit of insight into the overdiagnosed. So they keep changing things. And so they say, well, you know, if you got this much of this in your blood, then you're not diabetic. But if you have 1 point more, you're diabetic. Now we have to give you all this treatment. It's interesting, and if you keep lowering the number, you keep bringing more people in to be treated, and when you bring more people in to be treated, you sell more drugs, more diagnostics, and it just goes on and on and on. So I've said before, and I hate to say it, but I've watched medicine go from a healing art to the medical business. And once that happened, I noticed that it tended to attract more different types of people. People that thought, wow, this can be a good field to get into to make a lot of money. Whereas there was a time, nobody would put themselves through the rigors of becoming a physician if they weren't really dedicated to helping people. Now that's what originally it was, and I watched doctors from that period of time into today. And I'm not saying there's still not doctors that go into the field today because they think they're going to help people, but two things happen to those doctors. One is they realize what the system is, but they find themselves trapped because they've now engaged themselves in a lifestyle that necessitates them continuing. And I've talked to some of these doctors, and they personally don't want the treatment, and they don't want their family to have the treatment, but they feel that they have to stay in it now because they kind of painted themselves into a corner, and there's not a good way they can transition out of it. without suffering some tremendous changes in their social life and their financial life. So they are kind of stuck. Now the other group does do that. They say, wait a minute, I can't do this. And they start looking for alternatives. And some, even when they do find alternatives, realize again that it's a big trap that they're in, and so they don't utilize them because they find that if they do, they could be in jeopardy of losing their license or other consequences. And I've watched that happen. I've watched a lot of doctors who had chosen that path that no longer have a license and no longer can practice medicine. So it's a big problem. And unfortunately, I found in studying the history way back that the pharmaceutical interests realized what they had and they ran with it and they have milked it for everything in it. Now, I'm saying that because here is another book written called Big Pharma, Exposing the Global Healthcare Agenda. And of course, what is the global healthcare agenda? An industry insider, this person again came out of the medical system, lifts the lid on the world of the largest pharmaceutical companies to reveal the real challenge facing modern healthcare. For all the benefits they bring, the pharmaceutical industry's biggest companies headed by, and now this is her words, not mine, Pfizer, Merck, Sanofi, Aventis, and GlaxoSmithKline, increasingly face a conflict between the goals of corporate wealth and public health. And the bottom line is that the agenda, as I mentioned earlier, is we want to sell more drugs. I had an acquaintance, I've mentioned it before. He was in the marketing end of the pharmaceutical industry at one of the largest of the pharmaceuticals, and every month he was told by his superiors, our investors expect an increase in sales every month. If you cannot provide that, we will find somebody who can. And he finally quit from the pressure of it all and began to look other directions. And unfortunately, he's now a manufacturer of natural health products where they do help people and that they don't cost a fortune the way the others do. The other overtreated side is another book, and again, this comes from somebody who has been involved in the medical field. Shannon Brown Lee is the author, and that's Brownlee, Shannon Brown Lee. And it's called Overtreated: Why Too Much Medicine is Making Us Sicker and Poorer. Now again, I don't have time to get into all this stuff. I had flagged some things here, but the bottom line is this is all about the abuses of prescribing. Now, it's become apparent that in the medical world today, there's just so much feeling that there needs to be a pill. But see, the people, as I mentioned, have been programmed to want that. They think that every time they get a symptom, they must run to a doctor and get one or more medications. That they have to have medications or they might die. I mean, I understand people are fearing death, some do, and don't want to die, or they don't want to be sick or disabled, and that's understandable. But there's an unnatural fear that has been programmed into people that they must do something right away. And they go into a panic, and that's why if they think the healthcare system is not going to be able to give them coverage, that what are they going to do? You know, I could die. I can't get my medicine. And some of these medications are very powerful, and they're very dangerous. And there's no way that anybody knows what happens when you give a particular person 3 or 4 medications. Now, I don't have time to go in today, and we'll probably do that. We kind of mentioned it before, into the SNPs, which have to do with genetic differences that one person's body, the liver is able to detox out certain medications and toxins, and another person's body cannot. So that means if they take the drug, it will not get detoxed out of their body, and at the normal doses it will rapidly build up to a toxic dose and or a lethal dose, because it's all a matter of concentration. How many milligrams or micrograms per kilogram of body weight are you getting? And if you can't detox it out, you rapidly exceed the therapeutic window and you get into the toxic side, and pretty soon you can get into the lethal side. So that's why a lot of people die every year from medications. And so you go to a doctor and he writes you some prescriptions, and maybe you go to your specialist, because now everybody's convinced they must go to all these specialists. I mean, that's part of the big program of medicine, that you get on the merry-go-round, and then you can get all these different stations that you have to stop at along the way as part of the big program. And so then you go to your dermatologist, and you have something going on. So he may give you some medication, but the medication he gives you, no one knows, if you're already taking 2 or 3 medications, what another 1 or 2 will do. Because I studied pharmacology, and after 2 medications, it's a crapshoot. There's no way of knowing. There's no way you can research every combination of drugs and know what's going to happen in a particular person when they take it. Now, the pharmaceuticals became aware of the SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms, which means there are quirks in your genetic. That means your liver may not have a certain detox pathway that can take care of a certain type of chemical or toxin or drug. And so there's no way of knowing that. So the pharmaceuticals have to price in such a way that they know that any drug they put out, there's a likelihood that a certain small percentage are going to die from it. They know that. There's just no way you can avoid it. They also know that there's another group are going to be very seriously injured, impaired, disabled from the drug. They know that. And then they know that the large group of people are probably going to tolerate it okay. Over time, they may develop problems, but people probably won't associate it with the drug, so they don't have to worry about that. And then they know there's a small group that nothing seems to bother them. They say you can pour almost anything in them and their body's capable of taking care of it. And they know all this stuff. So they can calculate when they put a drug on the market that so many people are going to die from this drug. So what do? You build into the pricing enough money coming in right away from this drug that if there are any deaths, it doesn't cost you anything. The public has already paid for it in the purchase of the drug, and or the insurance company or whoever pays for the drug. So it's fine. And so they don't worry so much about it because they know they're covered. And it's rare that they get one that goes beyond their norm. So you can mathematically, with probability equations, determine about how many are going to die, how many are going to be seriously injured, how many are going to be able to tolerate it, and how many no problem at all. And therefore, it doesn't cost anything to them as far as they made their profit. And if they have to take a little of this money that they put aside based on the fact they knew that a few of the people were going to die anyhow, then they can settle any claims and get the people to sign that they won't disclose and that there's no admission that there was a problem, and so they get away with it. I mean, that's the way the game works. And so when you're taking all these drugs, I know when people come to see me that if they're taking 5, 6, 8, 10, I've had up to somebody come in with 25, with all kind of problems. Some of them are almost unable to function mentally because they are so poisoned with all the medication they're taking. And so where do you begin with somebody like that? Well, it's almost impossible, and for me, because I'm not going to take them off of their drugs. And they're going to have to go back to those doctors, and not any of those doctors are going to say, well, you don't really need this drug. I've been giving it to you, but you don't really need it. And so they're going to be stuck until something happens. Something's going to let go. It's going to be their nervous system. It's going to be their cardiovascular system. It's going to be their kidneys or livers. But something's going to let go because you can't tolerate that. Your body can't handle that over any length of time without paying a tremendous price. And so they think nothing of it. I told you a while back in one of my broadcasts, but I'll reiterate it today. I know of a pharmacist in a hospital who had actually was becoming disenamored with pharmacy because of the amount of drugs that were being prescribed to the patients in the hospital. But finally one day, 52 prescriptions came in for the same patient, and when he saw that, he said, there's no way I'm going to fill that. He actually folded it up and quit. He said, I'm not going to do that. There's no way of knowing what that's going to do to the people. It'll probably kill them, but the chances of it being exposed is very poor. Those numbers that come out that say 150 to 250,000 people die from too much drug interactions, reaction to the drug, etc., that's what is said. I know that as a rule, the CDC has said themselves that probably on adverse events, and of course in this one case they were mentioning about immunizations, and probably only 10% actually get reported. So now if you're saying 150,000 die every year from the medications, if only 10% really get reported, I mean, how many doctors want to say, oh yeah, this drug got prescribed, this guy killed him? They don't want to say that, and they're going to hope that there's some other reason put on it that they don't get, quote, a lawsuit. And so they're not going to report it. So if that's the case, then we're talking about 1.5 million, if it's 10 times higher than that, 1.5 million people are dying from the drugs. And so that would make it the highest cause of death, way over cardiovascular and cancer and all those. So I'm only saying all this that you might want to get the book Overtreated, How Too Much Medicine is Making Us Sicker and Poorer by Shannon Brownlee. Okay, now there's one more I wanted to bring up, maybe two more, and we're about out of time here. Seeking Sickness, Medical Screening and the Misguided Hunt for Disease. Now this gets back to what we said earlier, that the author is Alan Cassels, C-A-S-S-E-L-S. They talk about the fact that we're always looking, and it gets back to what I said earlier about being overtreated. We find things that really aren't a problem, but because the person has a symptom, we give them drugs which create much more problems than what the symptom would have ever caused in the person their whole life. And now again, this is admitted by people in the field. So this is not a bad book. Medical Screening and the Misguided Hunt for Disease, with the subtitle. And they go into quite a bit about it. Maybe you're better not. Now, I know it sounds bad to be critiquing, and I'm going to throw in one other book you should read. I'm not going to go into it. The author's name is Peter R. Breggin, B-R-E-G-G-I-N, M.D., and David Cohen, Ph.D. How and Why to Stop Taking Psychiatric Medications. Your Drug May Be Your Problem. All the problems that are caused by the psychiatric drugs. Dr. Breggin is a graduate of Harvard. He taught at Harvard. He's been a psychiatrist for years. He has been against using all the medications. He thinks you should use actual psychotherapy to help people get well and help them adjust to their life. And that everything that somebody has is not a chemical problem. It happens to be thinking and other background emotional issues. And that's what he does as a psychiatrist. And so he's been against all these psychiatric drugs, of which there's a multitude anymore. Very good book. One more I should throw in, the cholesterol hoax. This is a good one. This is about the 101 plus lies about cholesterol. But it's one of those that they keep changing the numbers and they keep writing more prescriptions. And of course, the fact is there's tremendous problems with the liver, and in some people very dangerous, by taking the statins. But nonetheless, it's being done and is continuing to be sold. Now, I was going to, and I'm going to throw this in as an introduction, because this is going to be another broadcast. But I had run across it and I was thinking about using it, and so this is a good place just to throw it in. In 1971, Nixon declares war on cancer. Nixon signs $1.6 billion cancer bill, names man to head fight. Well, that was the big official war on cancer, and a lot of money started being pumped into it. And the question is, where are we in this war? Now, I have a lot of other stuff and it's more than we're going to be able to cover today. But anyhow, the question is, he said that we've started the war, and I thought it interesting because many of the people at that time said, and they sponsored this whole idea, in 1971, many sponsors of the war on cancer predicted a cure by 1976. They said in 5 years, we're going to have it solved. But instead, the multi-billion-dollar research program has proven to be a failure. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about that and what's been happening. And it's too much to get in today, but that's a good introduction to the next one that we'll do. And then I've got some others lined up. But we really want, I've talked about cancer before, but I want to change the perspective a little bit when we talk about it now, because this gets in kind of with what we're talking about here, the overdiagnosis and the overtreatments. And so it's kind of a continuation, but it's a separate subject in itself. But I thought I would just throw that in, that here it is from 1971 until now. And so the question is, and even WHO, World Health Organization, asked the question sometime back, how are we doing on the war on cancer? Are we gaining ground? And so we'll go into some of the things that they have found out and some of the predictions and where we are at the moment, and I think you'll find it very intriguing. I think our time is more than expired, so it's time for me to fold up the camera and let you get this all put together so you can get into it. And it was nice being with you again. I want you to go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and pretty much all these books I believe that we've talked about today are on the book list. Again, I don't want you to believe it because I said it. I'm challenging and provoking you to look into it and reach your own conclusions. I'm convinced, but that doesn't mean you'll be convinced. But the information is there, and I am in a sense, out there looking at all the stuff that's going on, do a tremendous amount of research and review tremendous number of books so that I can bring you information. In today's world, I know time is limited, very difficult sometimes to be able to go out on your own and dig it. I've become kind of an expert of getting on the internet and digging out stuff that is hard to find. And having the broader outlook, I know now places to look to find it. And more whistleblowers are coming out, as you can see from the books I've mentioned. And there's a lot more than that. Those are just some of the ones that kind of stand out. And we'll be looking forward to you with the next broadcast. And so remember, mindyourhealthcast.com. And until next time, be healthy.